All right, hello and welcome. Today we are multiplying decimals by powers of 10. We're going to figure out exactly what this means and then also a few tricks that'll help us along the way. So let's get started. All right, to get started, we're going to take a look at the number 7. And we're going to multiply 7 by a few different powers of 10 here to follow the pattern. When I take a look here, my very first question is 7 times 1. Now I know that 7 times 1 is 7. I'm now going to take that 7 and place it below in my 7 times 10 question because this allows me to take a look at the 7 times 10. Now, 7 times 10 is 10 times greater than 7 times 1. And what that means is that my 7 here, when I multiply it by 10, moves up one entire place value. When it does that, it now sits in the tens section, and I need to fill in a 0 in my ones, meaning that 7 times 10 is 70. Continuing this, I have 7 times 1 at the top here, and below I have 7 times 100. I'm going to use that 7 again and place it right here in my 1 section of my 7 times 100. Now what I'm going to say to myself is that I know that 100 is 10 times 10, which means my 7 here is going to have to move 2 place values because for every time I multiply by 10, I move by 1 place value. So 10 times 10 means I'm going to move this 7 up 2 place values. That means that this 7 is going to move to the tens and now to the hundreds. After that, I'm going to put a 0 in my tens and a 0 in my ones, making 7 times 100, 700. Looking at this example here, it's 7 times 1,000. Now, 1,000 is 10 times 10 times 10. And if I follow my rule that for every multiple of 10, I move up 1 place value, then my 7 here is going to move up 1, 2, 3 place values. So it's going to move up 1, 2, 3 place values into the thousands here. And I'm going to fill in zeros here to make my final answer 7,000. Now this is where the decimals comes into play. When I take a look at my 7 multiplied by 10 here, I know that the answer is 70. But let's take a look here. When I start off, I have 7, and then I'm going to multiply it by 10. But technically I can say that this is 7.0. And when I move my decimal place, because I'm multiplying by 10, I can move my decimal place here to the right 1 place value. Because I know multiplied by 10, everything needs to shift 1 place value. So I'm going to move my decimal place here to the right 1 place value, giving me the answer of 70. This technique makes multiplying decimals by powers of 10 very, very simple. You can see that I have 7.1 multiplied by 10 here. I'm going to put my 7.1 in my answer here, and then all I'm going to do is say, since I'm multiplying by 10, I'm going to move it 1 decimal place to the right. So now that I've done that, I can see that my decimal moved to the right of the 1, leaving me with 71. So that's my answer. 7.1 times 10 is 71. Using this exact same technique with my 7.1 multiplied by 100, I'm going to move my decimal place 2 place values this time because I know that 100 is 10 times 10, and since I'm moving it 1 place value for every 10, then I'm going to move it 2 this time. But there's an even easier way to think about this. When I see that I have 100, it might seem a little weird to say, oh, I have to know that that is 10 times 10, but all I need to do is actually count the zeros inside my question here. Since there are 2 zeros, I know that 100 is 10 times 10, or 2 zeros means I move 2 place values. It's that easy. So I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to move it 1 place value and 2 place values. Now this answer is not quite complete yet because there's still 1 empty space there. What I need to do is see if there's any empty spaces there, and I need to put a placeholder in that empty spot. So I'm going to place a 0 here, making my final answer 710. 7.1 times 100 is 710. Moving on to my 7.1 times 1,000, the very first thing I'm going to do is figure out how many decimal places I'm going to move my answer. So I'm going to put my 7.1 here. And then I'm going to count the zeros in my question because I know that each one of these zeros, 1, 2, 3, represents a times 10 or a movement of place value. So I'm going to move my decimal places 1, 2, 3 times. So 7.1, I'm going to move it once, twice, 3 times, place my decimal here. Now you can see that there are some empty spaces. For each of these empty spaces, I'm going to put a 0. Now you can see my final answer is 7,100. For these two examples, I'm just going to take a quick moment to show how to actually move the decimal here. In my first question, I have 100 times 0.4. I'm going to place my 0.4, my answer, right here. And what I'm going to do is, because I have 2 zeros in my 100 here, 1, 2, I know that I have to move my place value, or my decimal, 2 place values to the right. So I'm going to take my decimal, slide it underneath the 4 here by making a loop. Now the decimal sits between the 4 and what would be a 0 after. And then I'm going to slide it one more time and make a loop like this. I'm now going to put a decimal at the end of my loops here. As you can see, there's a blank space in one of the loops. This is where I put my 0 placeholders. Whenever you see the little loop, you put a 0 here as a placeholder so that your final answer will be 40. Looking at 1,000 times 0.4, I put my 0.4 here, and I'm going to move it 1, 2, 3 because I have 3 zeros in my 1,000. So I'm going to make these loops underneath. 1, 2, and 3. I'm now going to move my decimal to the end here, and now I'll see that I have 2 spots that need the 0 placeholders. So I put my zeros here, making my final answer 400. Let's just go through a couple more examples here. I have 0.18 times 10. Because there's 1 0 in the 10 here, I know that I move my place value 1 to the right. I'm going to write my 0.18. I'm then going to take this place value and move it 1 to the right and place it here, making my final answer 1.8. Looking at the next question, I'm now going to do 0.18 times 100. I have my 0.18 here. I have 1 and 2 zeros here. I'm going to move my decimal 2 to the right. So I have 1 and 2. I'm going to place my decimal here, meaning I have 18 as my final answer. When you take a look at these questions, you might be intimidated by the size of the numbers, 1,000 or 10,000. But again, it's just as simple as knowing that 3 zeros here, 1, 2, 3, simply means that I move 3 decimal places. So I have my 0.34, and I'm going to move it 1, 2, 3 decimal places. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, and I'm going to place my decimal right here. This right here, I know that I need to put a placeholder there because there is an empty spot. This leaves me with a final answer of 340. So 0.34 times 1,000 is 340. Doing the same thing on the next one, it's 10,000. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4 zeros in my question. And so that would mean that I have my 0.34. I'm going to move it 4 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, and I place my decimal here. Again, I have an empty space and an empty space. I'm going to fill those up with zeros, giving me 3,400 for my final answer. When seeing a question written like this, some people can sometimes get a little worried that they need to follow a different technique, but you don't. You simply count the zeros. 1, 2, 3, 4 zeros in my question. I have 0.27. I'm going to move it 4 times to the right. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Place my decimal here. I need to fill in these last spots with zeros here, giving me the final answer of 2,700. 0.27 times 10,000 is 2,700. When we see this question here, we can see that we have quite a lot of digits in my decimal section. You follow the exact same rules here. I take a look at my 100 on this side, and I have 2 zeros in my 100, meaning I need to move my decimal place 2 to the right. So I have my 0.0034. I'm going to take my decimal, I'm going to move it 1 and 2, and I'm just going to place it right here. This now makes this section here my final answer, 0.34. So the answer to this is 0.34. Hopefully by now you feel a little bit more comfortable in multiplying decimals by powers of 10. There is that simple technique that you can follow that will get you the answer each time. So good luck, have fun.